Hi friends, this is Terry Stewart, Independent Stampin Up demonstrator located in the US in Maryland. Welcome to this edition of our video log hop. Our technique, actually I'm doing a technique. The theme of this hop is rainbows, but I'm going to share a technique. So let's get started. So as I said, the theme for this blog hop, vlog hop, is rainbows. Now I've done a rainbow background for my project, and I'm going to share with you the technique I use to do this with. The image I'm using comes from In the Moment stamp set. Here's the woman looking over something, and on the inside, You're in My Thoughts, and that comes from the set. The sentiment on the front comes from Dress to Impress. So let me show you how I did my background. So I started with a piece of shimmery cardstock, and it's a quarter sheet. It's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. Centimeters are 10 1/2 by 14.9. All the measurements, both imperial and metric, you can find on my blog at stampinghair.blogspot.com. Check below in the details, and there'll be a link to my blog post with all the measurements. So for my rainbow, I'll be creating that with markers and ink refills. So my rainbow is made from Real Red, Daffodil Delight, Pumpkin Pie. I don't have a garden green marker, so I'll be using the garden green ink refill. Pacific Point. I don't have a marker for the Rich Razzleberry, so I'll be using a reinker for that. And then the final color is Blackberry Bliss. For this technique, I'll be using my block E, and to hold my reinkers, I have this small block C, but you can really use anything, even if you have wax paper or something like that. Now I chose a quarter sheet because this block will fit on, and that's what I'm actually creating this rainbow with, is using my block. So to do that, I'm going to take my markers and use the brush end of them and fill up this block with colors. I'm going to start at one end and just go back and forth approximately a 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter. Now I do want the red and the Blackberry Bliss, I will be using a little bit wider margin for that. There's my red. I'll do the same with Daffodil Delight. And I'm going to come up close to the red, but not right next to it. I don't want to impact my marker. So about a 1/2 inch back and forth. And then Pumpkin Pie. Same thing. About 1 centimeter. Close to the Daffodil Delight, but not right. Not mixing my colors. Now, as I said before, I don't have a garden green marker, so I'm going to put one little dab of reinker on this block, and using a blender pen, pick up that ink and then make my the green stripe. And see, it works really well. And you don't have to worry about staining your marker, because as for blender pens, you just wipe away until the color disappears. So just back and forth, and you'll see it gets lighter and lighter, and eventually it'll be clear, and then all that ink is out of the marker. And this is a great way to have a lot of colors when you don't have the ink pad. If you have a reinker and a blender pen, then you can have a marker in that color. So they're just about gone. So just clean this until it's clear. Eventually it'll get there. And then you do want to cap it because they can dry out. And then I'm going to move on to my next color, the Pacific Point. And now we come to Rich Razzleberry, and the same, I'll repeat the process where I'll put one dot here, one drop on my block, and then pick up my blender pen, which I have cleaned, and make that 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter stripe. And I am going all the way to the end and up close, but right next to my previous color, but not really mixing them. And the same, I'll clean this blender pen the same way, just rubbing it till it runs clear, twisting the marker, the point. So I'm rubbing it on the side of the point, so I'm not damaging the tip. You see, eventually it does run clear and ready to be used for another color. And then I'm going to cap that. And then my final color is my Blackberry Bliss. And I will fill in the rest of the block with that. Okay, so now we've got all our rainbow colors on the block, and this can just be easily washed off with your chamois or paper towel. Just clean that up very easily. So you want to make sure you're using water-based markers. So I'm going to bring in my scrap paper and my shimmery cardstock and a spritzer. Now I have water in my spritzer. So let me move this out of the way. I'm going to spritz like 3 times, approximately 4 inches, 10 centimeters. I'm going to spritz my block. 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe a 5th time just to get all this. So I don't want to oversaturate it. And now I can bring back my shimmery cardstock, and I'm going to turn this over and try to center it within my cardstock. So turn it over, center it as best to my ability, and then push down. Now every time you will get a different background, and they'll be unique depending on how much water, how wide you made your stripes. So I'm just going to press this, and then I'll lift up. And if there are any, I can dab these puddles. But basically, that's my rainbow. And again, I can use my chamois just to wipe this off because it is water-based, and that's why you want to make sure you're using water-based inks, because you can permanently marker. If you use alcohol blends, it will permanently reside on your acrylic block. So there is the background. We've created. Now I would set this aside to dry, and I would put my blocks, I would anchor it down with blocks just to keep it flat. In the interest of time, I'm bringing in one that I created earlier. And I'll set this aside to dry and make a different project with that. So once you have your dried image, you want to cut it down to be 3 1/4 by 4 1/4. So I'm bringing my paper trimmer, and I'm just going to line up the edge of where it ended, the edge of my inked image, and cut that. So you just want to be right at the very edge. And like I said, it'll end up being 3 1/4, approximately 3 1/4, 8.3 centimeters. By 4 1/4. Or 10.8 centimeters. I've just trimmed it down basically to the size of the block. So for the rest of our ingredients to make this card, I have a piece of shimmery cardstock that's 1 by 1 3/4 or 2 1/2 by 4 1/2 centimeters. A piece of the mother of pearl specialty paper. Can you see how this sparkles? It's just so lovely. And that's what I've used as a border behind our rainbow background. And that's 3 1/8 by 4 3/8. And then I have a piece of DSP from Sweet Talk, and that's 3 7/8 by 5 1/8. And a piece of white cardstock 4 by 5 1/4, and this is the inside layer. The base card is a half sheet of black cardstock scored in half. So that's 5 1/2 by 8 1/2, scored at 4 1/4. For our metric friends, that's 14.9 by 21 centimeters, scored at 10 1/2 centimeters. Now it's time for some stamping. So I'll be using this image from In the Moment on the front, and on the inside, You're in My Thoughts. So I'll be stamping with Memento Tuxedo Black right on top of my rainbow image. I've mounted my image on my E-block, and I found it's easier to bring the ink pad to the ink to stamp this image. I like the red color at the top of my rainbow, and I'm going to center this image, my stamped image, right in the middle of my panel. And just press for a few seconds to give time for the image to transfer on. Perfect. I'll set that aside. Now I'm going to stamp my sentiment on the front and on the inside using Blackberry ink, Blackberry Bliss ink. On the front, I'm using this Hello Fabulous from the Dress to Impress. And here's my stamp. And this small piece of shimmer cardstock. And I'll just stamp right in the middle. And the good thing about this is a photopolymer. I can see right through it. So I can position it just where I want on this little piece of cardstock. And then finally, You're in My Thoughts. And that is also from the In the Moment stamp set. And I'm going to stamp that right in the middle here. Perfect. And that's all the stamping for this project. So I did want to give some texture to this image. Now that I have created my rainbow background, put an image on it, I'm going to use this Painted Texture 3D embossing folder. You can see the texture it adds to this image. It really just gives it a wonderful touch, I believe. So let me bring in my cut and emboss machine. Because I am using a 3D embossing folder. I will move plates 2 and 3 and bring in plate 4. Place my stamped image in the center. Line it up, and then with the crease going in, I'll run it through. And voila, look at that lovely texture. Just really adds to this image. And there is our embossed image. And now we can start assembling. So I'll take my black cardstock base, and I've scored that in half. I'm going to use my bone folder to crisp up the score line. And the first layer is this piece of Sweet Talk DSP. So this is found in the January to June mini, and it had these stripes, and these stripes, which kind of reminded me of the rainbow colors we were using. They're not exactly, we got the real red, we have a lighter Highland Heather, and I just felt like it was perfect for this. Even though it has hearts on it, these stripe patterns worked well, and I couldn't decide which one to use, so I did my sample with Highland Heather stripe, and then I'll be using this other pattern from the same set for this project. So that way I have cards with both and see which one I like the best. Now I've cut this piece to 3 7/8 by 5 1/8, or 9.7 by 14.2, 14.1, somewhere in that vicinity. So I'll just adhere this with my liquid glue and center that on the front. As I said earlier, the stream of paper, when it dries, it could be bowed. So to combat that, I'm going to use tear and tape to adhere it to the next layer. And this will help it lay flat. This is super sticky, so it's a great adhesive when you have paper that could have a tendency to bow or pucker. And that will be placed on this piece of mother of pearl specialty paper, also from the January to June. You can see the sparkle. It's just so beautiful. So I'm going to take my pick tool and lift this cover off the tear and tape. So the other thing is the paper, has a tendency to bow when it gets wet, and then using the painted texture embossing folder also causes some ripples in the cardstock. So that's another reason to use the tear and tape. Now this should have a very small, narrow border of the mother of pearl. It just gives it a little extra sparkle. And that now gets placed on our card front. So make sure that you visit the other vloggers and see even more projects featuring rainbows. The next link is in the description below, so check it out in the description of this video so you can hop and see even more fun projects. And let me put this inside in, adhere that. piece just gets centered on the inside. And for our sentiment here, I'm going to be using dimensionals to pop this up. I love dimensionals. I rarely make a project that doesn't feature them. And I'll put this down in the corner and offset it a little bit from the panel. And then the final touch is bringing in some rhinestones and adding them along the side. And this adds even more bling. So there's very subtle bling in this. You've got the shimmer and the shimmer paper, the shimmery paper. You have the mother of pearl, just a tad of that showing. There we go. That one tried to jump away. So there you have it, 2 projects, both using the Sweet Talk DSP. Leave me a comment and tell me which pattern you prefer, the gorgeous grape or the more colorful stripes. Remember to hop and visit the other vloggers. See the description below to hop along. Thank you so much for joining me today. And remember, stamping is fun. Bye.